I think we need to talk about men. Making good men is what Melbourne High School does best. And right now, what the world certainly needs is more good men, because it seems the world finally has had a gutful of the damage bad men can do. Each day that goes by, there's a new revelation in the media of the damage that they can do. It's been less than 2 months since the New York Times published allegations of sexual harassment and assault perpetrated by Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein. And in that time, both women and men have come forward with reports of predatory sexual behaviour that run the gamut from unsolicited lewd texts to sexual assault by over 60 men in the movie industry. There have also been allegations of sexual misconduct perpetrated by 3 of America's past 5 presidents. In the case of Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, these allegations were widely canvassed prior to and during their election campaigns, yet they were elected anyway. Public figures who until then had been universally admired, such as Rolf Harris, Bill Cosby and Jimmy Savile, have been charged with systemically preying on young women over decades. Their predatory behaviour was no secret to many of their colleagues, yet those colleagues remained silent and allowed that abuse to continue. This wave of disclosure and exposure, exemplified by the Me Too movement, has also now reached these shores, as inevitably it would and should. In the past month, 500 Australian women have come forward naming 65 men as abusers in the media industry alone. The first high-profile case has been broadly reported in the last few days, and no doubt many more will follow. I also have no doubt that a culture of systemic and pervasive misogynistic abuse of women is not confined to the media industry alone. Let's consider another uniquely Victorian industry. In the past decade, the police have instigated investigations into a sexual misconduct perpetrated by over 30 AFL footballers. Most recently, this included a Richmond player distributing an explicit image of his girlfriend to his mates immediately after the grand final, after assuring her he had deleted it. Earlier this year, 2 of the AFL's most senior executives were sacked following revelations of predatory sexual behaviour towards young women in their own workplace. That is the same workplace where a list of the top 10 hottest female staff members had been circulated amongst almost all of the male staff. Now, there are 3 very hard truths we must confront as a consequence of all of this. First, we can no longer dismiss this as the behaviour of a few bad apples. There's a false comfort in confining and defining this problem as the despicable acts of an evil few. If that was true, we just pluck out the bad apples and the problem goes away. But unfortunately, the core of this evil lies deeper than that. So the second hard truth is that these abuses were enabled and perpetuated by the systems of power surrounding those men. The senior managers of Children's Hospital in the UK welcomed Jimmy Savile's charity visits to their wards in full knowledge that he would use those visits to sexually assault the young children in the hospital's care. When a woman made a police report of sexual assault by an AFL footballer, senior officers intervened, saying they needed to make this complaint go away. A young actress's publicist sent her to Harvey Weinstein's hotel room in full knowledge of what she would encounter. So it's not just the apples that are rotten. There's something very rotten in the systems that overtly and inadvertently protect these men and move to marginalise and silence those who speak out. In the words of one Hollywood insider who had heard stories about Harvey Weinstein's predatory behaviour, "Since this story broke last week, I've been struggling with my shame. It shouldn't matter what my place was, my level of success, my degree of power. It should only matter that I knew this was happening and I stayed silent." We all stayed silent. And the final hard truth is there's something rotten about the way we men think and act towards women and the way we think about ourselves as men. You only have to look at the raw statistics to understand the magnitude of violence and abuse towards women in Australia. Every week, at least one Australian woman is killed by her current or former male partner. 1 in every 3 Australian women over the age of 15 has been physically or sexually assaulted by somebody they know. Almost every Australian woman has been subject to some form of sexual abuse or harassment. These women are our sisters, our daughters, and our mothers. They are every woman. But there's another way of looking at those statistics. Every week, at least one Australian man kills his current or former partner. 1 in every 3 Australian men will physically or sexually assault a woman they know. And almost every Australian man will subject a woman to some form of sexual harassment or an abuse, or as at least will be complicit in this, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But these men are our brothers. They are our sons, they are our fathers. These men are us. To all of the men out there who want to say back, but that's not me, I've never done any of those things, and I sincerely hope that's true. But let me ask you this. Were you ever in a group of men when someone made a disparaging, sexist or misogynistic remark or a joke about a woman? Did you do anything about it? Did you giggle nervously about it, but otherwise just let it pass? Have you witnessed a woman being wolf-whistled or leered at in public? Did you do anything about it, or did you decide it really wasn't your business? Because it is your business. I want to light upon street harassment for a minute to illustrate why it's your business, and I do this deliberately because I'm hoping that there are not too many of people here in this audience who are wolf whistlers in the street. A 2015 US study found that 85% of women had experienced sexual harassment in the street by the time they were 18. I wonder how many men have been subject to sexual harassment in the street by the time they're 18. What's the motive, the message, and the impact of street harassment? Well, this is how one woman explained it. The words of street harassment fall on a spectrum of disrespect. They are not just words, they are a threat. A threat of implied violence lies behind each of those words. The words are nothing compared with what they could be, and they are intended that way, as a smirking warning to all women. Now, it's our responsibility as men to face that uncomfortable truth about our own culture, about masculinity. Men are not inherently violent or abusive, but we make ourselves so, and our silence and inaction permits others to be so. Not all men will abuse or assault women, but it's the responsibility of all men to call out both friends and strangers when they perpetuate the sexist and misogynistic attitudes and behaviours that allow the abusers to go unchallenged. Unless you speak out, your silence will be taken as complicit support by the perpetrator. And the research clearly shows that allowing everyday low-level sexism and sexual harassment to continue feeds the climate and attitudes that perpetuate sexual violence. It's the seed from which all this rottenness grows. The research also suggests that if a man is called out about using inappropriate and abusive language by his peers, the risk of them progressing to more serious forms of abuse drops by 80%. It's going to take a critical mass of good men to turn around the male culture that allows those rotten seeds of sexual violence to propagate. And where are we going to find those good men? Well, that's the good news part of this equation. This is where Melbourne High School comes in. I want you to consider these 4 factors. First, every year Melbourne High School graduates 330 young men. This represents the single largest cohort of young men moving from school into the wider world in Australia. And yes, I've checked the claim and it's true. Secondly, collectively these 330 young men are the smartest, finest and most socially aware band of young men you're going to find anywhere. Thirdly, it has always been the case that Melbourne High School has seen its primary purpose as nurturing men of good character. The most important benefit this school offers every student who walks its halls is not a 95 plus ATAR, it's the stepping stones of being of good character. And finally, Melbourne High School has been selected as a lead school in the rollout of the Respectful Relationships program. This program is a direct response to the 2015 Victorian Royal Commission into Family Violence. The Respectful Relationship program focuses on the development of positive attitudes and values such as respect, responsibility and equality to challenge the misogynistic and disrespectful attitudes that perpetuate sexual violence. Every Victorian school will be required to introduce respectful relationships programs in the next 3 years. But to the best of my knowledge, Melbourne High School is the only school that has opted to deliver that program as a course of study in its own right. It will form an integral part of our personal development program at both years 9 and 10. Our ambition is that each year we will graduate good men who will advocate for and insist upon respect and equality for women. Our ambition is that every year we will graduate good men who will turn to friends who have made a sexist remark and say, "It's not on, mate, don't do it." Our ambition is that every year we will graduate good men who will go to the wolf whistler in the street and say, "It's not on, mate, don't do it." The research suggests that if a critical mass of good men were to do this consistently, the levels of sexual harassment and abuse would fall by 80%. Tonight, Melbourne High School farewells the class of 2017, and a remarkable and formidable band of good men they are. They have created a peerless legacy of improving and changing this school. The school is a far better place thanks to them, and we're very sorry to see them go. I'd like to personally acknowledge and thank the class of 2017 for this exceptional legacy. They are truly fine men. And now they're going to take those remarkable qualities out into the wider world. They'll change that world and they will improve that world. It'll take a critical mass of good men to change the way their peers think about and treat women. It will take a critical mass of good men to root out the rottenness in the hearts of masculinity that engenders violence and the harassment of women. Every year, Melbourne High School will send out 330 good men to add to that critical mass. Sooner or later, and I hope sooner rather than later, the tide will turn. So to the class of 2017, good men tried and true, and to all those other good men out there, I farewell you by reminding you of the words of the English philosopher Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Thank you.